Basically, the idea of amshas or vargas or zodiac subdivisions is very simple. The idea is that we can break the signs into smaller sections. And the result is, instead of having a zodiac that can only represent 12 identities, we get one that can easily represent about 720 unique identities. If you want to know what this means to you and your chart, I have just released a brand new and very groundbreaking report that explores exactly that, all of the subdivisions for your chart. It's available now on my site, victicare.com. So let's talk about these subdivisions. How many are there? There's 10. And they're in two categories. There are zodiacal subdivisions, which means these subdivisions are identified as signs within the main sign. And then there are 5 non-zodiacal subdivisions who are so categorized because their divisions are not identified with zodiac signs. They're identified with other things, usually with planetary rulers. Each subdivision has a particular interpretive theme that it's focused on. That's what makes them very, very useful. You can zoom in on a particular theme by looking at the subdivision chart that pertains to that theme. So let me explain what those themes are. The most popular and, in fact, useful subdivision is the Navamsha, or the ninths of signs. The theme of this division is Dharma, which means the essence. It's like this is the essence of what you are. And if you are not being this chart, then you don't feel right. Then there's the 7th of signs, which is the Saptamsha. This one is all about your creativity and your productivity. It has a lot to do with children. It has a lot to do with sexuality and marriage. And it has a lot to do with artistic creativity. Then there's the 10ths, the Dashamsha. This one has to do with siddhi, or your success. So it has a lot to do with your career and your fame and notoriety, and what you're very, very good at. Then there's the Dvadashamsha, which is the 12th of signs. This one is about Pitriya, which means ancestry and afterlife. So it has to do with what you are hardwired for from your ancestors in this life and from yourself as an ancestor in previous lives. And therefore, it also reflects on what you're hardwired towards in your next life. And then finally, for the zodiacal subdivisions, there's the 16th of signs. This one is all about your comfort. And especially it has to do with your level of comforts and like your luxuries and wealth. Then we also have 5 non-zodiacal subdivisions. The biggest of these is the halves of signs, the Hora. This one is very thematically similar to the smallest subdivision, the halves of degrees, Shashtyamsa, the 60th of signs. Both of them have to do with how stable you are in terms of how much you are synergized, how much your different components are synergized on kind of hardness or softness or maleness or femaleness. And thus it has a lot to do with how much charisma you have, how convincing you are, how attractive you are, and thus how prosperous you are. Then there's another group of subdivisions here in the non-zodiacal section, the 3rds and the 5ths, Treka and Trimsha. Both of these have to do with how you deal with things. The 3rds has to do with your ambition and therefore how you deal with competition and how you deal with fighting, how you fight, how you deal with rivals. The 5th has to do with your problems and how you cope with your problems and how you solve problems. And then finally, the last of the 10 classical subdivisions is Chaturamsha, or Devata Amsha. This one is actually very related to the 16ths because it's just a multiple of 16ths, 4 and 16. And the theme is the same. It has to do with your mental health. And while the 16th is more focused on your external wealth and luxuries and how happy you are with those, the Chatramsha is much more internally focused about how emotionally content you are and how you find serenity or how you wind up feeling anxiety. So if you weren't totally interested in these subdivisions before, I bet you are now, because this is really interesting. So don't forget, I just released the report on your subdivisions and it's available now on my site. I'll put the link in the description below. Let me show you how we create subdivisional charts and what they actually literally are in the zodiac. I'll just show you one example because from that it's easy to understand how the other 9 subdivisions work. I'll show you how Navamsha works, the 9th of signs. So take a sign. Let's take the first sign, Aries. Divide it into as many parts as you're supposed to divide it into. So for the 9ths, divide it into 9 parts. In almost all cases, you'll use equal sized parts. Then identify the sections that you've just created as zodiac signs within the main zodiac sign. The first section of Aries is Aries also. And then just go in order from there. When you get to the end of Aries, go to the next sign. Look at Taurus. Do the same thing, divide it into 9 equal sections. And then just continue the identification process from the previous sign. So since Aries ended with Sagittarius, Taurus will start with Capricorn. And when you get to Pisces, you just restart at Aries. And if you do this around the whole zodiac, you'll get the identities and locations of all 108 of the 9ths, the Navamshas. Now I want to show you how you translate this into an interpretable chart in and of itself. Let me begin by just showing you how you would do this for the main chart. This way you'll see how it's practically exactly the same thing. It's not really difficult. So let's identify the ascendant for a chart. We'll use my chart. So we'll put the ascendant at 25 degrees of Capricorn and then just put the planets in the positions where they belong. Now, you can assemble a very interpretable house-based chart diagram like this. First of all, get the sign of the ascendant and write it in that central square up at the top of the diagram. And then just go counterclockwise, assigning the signs to each house in the natural order. After that, all you have to do is put each planet in the sign where it belongs. So in this case, we have Rahu, the north node, in Pisces. So we stick it there in Pisces, which is the 3rd house of this chart. This is a whole sign system. Saturn is in Taurus, so put it in the 5th house in Taurus. Moon is in Gemini, so put it in the 6th house in Gemini. We have 3 planets in Leo, so put them all in the 8th house Leo. The Sun, Mars, and Mercury. We got 2 planets in Virgo, Venus, and Ketu. So put them in Virgo in this chart, which is the 9th house. And then finally, we have Jupiter in Libra. So put it in Libra in this chart, which is the 10th house. Now you've made a house-based chart, using which it's very easy to do house-based interpretation. So that's how we make a main chart. Now let me show you how similar, almost exactly the same it is, to make a subchart like a Navamsha. Take that same chart, but instead of just a plain zodiac, we'll use a wheel that also has the Navamsha divisions that we just worked out. Now you can see that the ascendant, which is in Capricorn, is in the Leo subsection, the Leo 9th of Capricorn. And Rahu, which is in Pisces, is in the Cancer subsection. Saturn in Taurus is in the Cancer subsection, also of Taurus. Moon is in the Scorpio subsection of Gemini. The Sun and Mars are together in the Taurus subsection of Leo, while Mercury is in the Scorpio subsection of Leo. Ketu is in the Capricorn subsection, Venus is in the Gemini subsection, and so is Jupiter. See it? Now, once we've identified these subsections that the planets belong to, we just get one of these charts and start drawing on it. So since the ascendant is in the Leo 9th, make Leo the first house of the ninth's chart. And then just go counterclockwise in order to ascribe signs to the remainder of the 11 houses in this chart. Now we have determined the houses of the Navamsha, the houses of the ninth subdivision. Now just do the same thing that you did for the main chart. Take the sign that the planet is in that subdivision and draw it into the chart for that subdivision. So since Rahu is in Cancer subdivision, put it in Cancer, which is the 12th house of this chart. And put Saturn there too, because Saturn is also in a Cancer subdivision. Put the moon in Scorpio, because that's the subdivision that it's in. So that puts it in the 4th house of the Navamsha. The Sun and Mars are together in Taurus, so put them in Taurus, the 10th house of this chart. Mercury is in Scorpio, so put it with the moon in the 4th house of this chart, in the sign of Scorpio. Ketu is in Capricorn, so put it in Capricorn, the 6th house. Venus is in Gemini, so put it in Gemini, the 11th house, and put Jupiter there too. So now I'm sure you noticed something extremely interesting. Planets which are not physically close to each other can become close to each other in a subdivision chart. And how would that happen if there are certain multiple of degrees apart from each other? In the case of Navamsha, it's 40 degrees and multiples of 40, such as 120, the trine, which is really what the Navamsha is all about, identifying the trines and the multiples of trines. So because the moon is in Scorpio Navamsha and Mercury is also in a Scorpio Navamsha, that means that they're about 80 degrees away from each other, which means that they're influencing each other, and that shows up by looking at this subdivision chart. The same can be noticed for Saturn and Rahu in this case. They're both in Cancer, about 80 degrees apart, so they both wind up in the same 12th house of the Navamsha. The same for Jupiter and Venus, the two benefics. They both wind up in Gemini, in the 11th house of this Navamsha. And the one other conjunction that we have in this Navamsha is the Sun and Mars, and that comes from a plain old simple conjunction. Both of these planets are literally in exactly the same Navamsha. So now you see a hint about why these subcharts exist, because they're actually ways of interpreting aspects that are better ways of interpreting aspects than just the simple aspect. And also what I hope you can really see now is that the subdivision chart and the main chart are not two separate things. They're two maps of the same thing. The one chart produces both of these charts. To do the other subdivisions, you just do literally exactly the same thing that you just did. But instead of using the Navamsha wheel, you use the wheel that's appropriate for that subdivision. And now for the really juicy part. Just like we can interpret the main chart, we can do the exact same things for these subcharts, focus on the particular themes that they represent. So for a main chart, for example, you'd be familiar with seeing stuff like this, where you can interpret planets and houses based on their dignity and signs and so forth. Well, guess what? Now you can do the same thing for your Navamsha or for any of the subdivisions. And that's exactly what I'm offering in this new report. It's going to have your planet in the house, considering the dignity of the sign, interpretations for every single subdivision focused on the theme of that subdivision. And that's just getting started with what it offers. There's another really incredibly groundbreaking thing that it offers, which is the bi-wheel of how the subdivision intersects the main division, which I'll speak about in later videos. So that's all for now in this video. Just head over to my site, victorcara.com. Go over to the reading sections. You can select which module you want. You can get both modules if you want. The first one is just the interpretations for the basic chart. The second module is this thing that I'm talking about now, the subdivisions. Select which modules you want, and then click the button to add your birth data, and then click the button to order it. Thank you.